What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless Engineer, and typically I'm critically analyzing apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. But today I'm here with another interview with the Bible guy from TikTok. I came across Bible guy's live streams, and I really enjoyed like all the conversations that he was having and a lot of his positions, mainly because he's really been out there defending the mythicist position, and that's kind of really what caught my eye at first. So I'm really excited to have you here on the show. There, Bible guy. Do you want to tell everybody kind of like who you are, where they can find you, and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So I'm the Bible guy. Dalton's the Bible guy. You can find me on TikTok at the Bible guy 96. We generally do a lot of debates with people, Muslims, and as of recently, we've been doing a lot of mythicist content as well as talking about free will, determinism. That's where you can find me. I'm hoping eventually one day to have a YouTube, but right now we're just doing TikTok.
Just doing TikTok.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just now noticing this, but your mic is, I don't know which mic is being used by your phone, but it sounds a little weird. I'm sorry I didn't say something before we went live.
No, you're fine here. Let me just try this out for a second. Hopefully it'll be better mic quality for you. How's that?
I think it still sounds the same.
If I get a little closer, will you be able to hear me better? Just speak up a little bit louder.
Oh yeah. That sounds better.
All right, fantastic.
Okay, so sorry about that. I should have could have got done with that beforehand. Anyways, so over there on TikTok, I think that that scene over there on TikTok is really growing, and you get a lot of viewers. When you're going live, like you were just live right before this, and you had like 200, I think, maybe at one point, and you continue to get a lot of people in. So it looks like you want to say something about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's really mostly thanks to my co-host Ashlyn. She's really good at noticing like the trends when people are like watching, and she's very good at like advertising for me. So I probably wouldn't be as popular if it hadn't been for her helping me out in that area.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I would love to do lives, but like I've got a full schedule, and so it really I really just like participating on occasion, like in your lives or other people's lives. But in any case, let's get on into your background, which you kind of talk about here and there. But I'm just kind of wondering, what kind of role did religion play in your life? Like early life, or up until this point, like what did that look like for you?
It was a huge mess, John. Let me tell you something. So a lot of people who become atheists are usually just like there's some kind of Christian or some sort of religious background, and then they go right into atheism. Mine was a little bit more messy than that. I have had a background in Protestant Christianity, Catholic Christianity, and Judaism. So I've dipped my toes in a lot of different spiritual schools, but I grew up Protestant, evangelical Protestant. I'm from Texas in the South, and that's probably one of the most proliferate forms of Christianity around here. Our church was really like that kind of very stereotypical, we speak in tongues, and we're also really into tithing, that kind of church. I guess my family began to become more religious around the time I was like 5 or 6 years old. My parents had gone to jail, and while they were in jail, they found Jesus. They kind of had a come to Jesus moment, and then they brought Jesus home back for us to experience. And we pretty much were in church all of our young lives up until I was probably 20. That was a regular member of that specific church. But I was always kind of very curious about religion. I wasn't the kind of Christian that kind of went to church on Sundays and just had to hear what the pastor had to say. I was always very inquisitive. So I was studying my Bible from very early on. In fact, I still have my first ever Bible from back when I was a little Protestant boy. And and it's very well worn. I put it to work, and so I know I was very into studying religion and Christianity. I was very into like Bible verse memorization, and I started learning Hebrew when I was 16 years old because I wanted to understand the Bible from the same perspective that Jesus would have understood the Bible, and I've been studying Hebrew for about 10 years now. Eventually, eventually though, when I was around the area of 16 years old, I got interested in a very specific type of Protestant evangelical Christianity, which is Messianic Judaism. I got involved with the Messianic movement and got really immersed in Jewish culture, and and eventually just became unconvinced that Jesus was the Messiah as a result, and left Christianity for Orthodox Judaism. Um, this would go on for some time until it's probably due to a lot of familial and societal pressure where I live. I was asked to basically give Jesus another chance, and I tried going back into Christianity. Of course, I wasn't interested in the kind of Christianity that I'd been raised in, Protestantism, and I went into Catholicism just to see if I could find something older or authentic, and I remained so for quite some time until I really just had the conclusion that because of how much study of the Bible I'd engaged with, that I really didn't believe it. Oh, your mic is. I can't hear you.
Sorry, I was muted. Well, I was gonna say sorry for harping on this, but it is still getting a little bit hard to hear you with your mic. Is there like a settings icon that you can select like the mic that you're using, or I don't know how it works on the Android phone.
Let me take a look. Settings, audio. Um,
Is this better?
Oh yes, that is so much better. I'm so sorry we didn't figure that out before.
Absolutely.
Okay, awesome. Great. All right. So you grew up and did you said that you were Catholic, right?
So I grew up Protestant and later went to try to look into Catholicism to see if it could be if there was any kernel of truth in it, and kind of by means of like really trying really hard in order to fit into like the Christian society around me, just kind of a lot of cognitive dissonance into trying to convince myself that it was true. Um, but a lot of it was really half-hearted. I had a lot of trouble with morally with a lot of the things that Catholicism put forward. I had grown to be more friendly towards members of the LGBT community over time, and the way that the church treated them, I found to be kind of disgusting, quite frankly. And also, I got more interested in biblical scholarship that wasn't Christian and it wasn't Jewish or it didn't come from any like dogmatic perspective. And
Mhm.
it became very clear to me that the way in which I had conceptualized God and the Bible growing up under dogma uh, was not cutting it and it was not accurate to the original text.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Well, of course, it took me a little bit longer to get out of it, but maybe I'll get into that later. I actually I was started out Catholic and then became Protestant, and honestly, I was one of the Christians that just never really thought like too critically about things. So it's interesting to hear that you really wanted to dive into the languages that Jesus wanted to speak, and that's how you came to learn Hebrew. That's one of the things that really kind of makes your TikTok presence, I guess, unique in that you actually understand Hebrew. Now, do you like fully understand the Hebrew language? Could you sight read Hebrew?
I can sight read for the most part. Like most Bible passages I open up, I'm going to understand the vast majority of it. There'll always be words that I'm still learning. I'm not by any means absolutely fluent in Hebrew, and also I cannot speak Hebrew conversationally. If I
Mhm.
went to Israel today, I wouldn't know what the hell anyone was saying. I might be able to pick up a few words here or there, but mostly my Hebrew reading is I can open up a Hebrew Bible, and a vast majority of it makes sense to me. If I don't know something, well, there you go. There's an opportunity to learn a new word.
How integral was faith to to you, I guess, growing up? Like, I know that you said that you kind of really wanted to get into it, and that's why you started learning how to read Hebrew. But I guess what I'm really asking is, like, did you go to like youth services? Like, were you part of a Bible study and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so I was involved in a lot of youth group services. My dad was a sort of youth pastor for our church, and I sort of like co-youth pastored with him when I was a teenager. Faith was very important to me. It was more important to me than probably anything else. I like to say I did not have much of a social life in high school because I was just so much. I was very dedicated to. If I went home, if as soon as I finished my homework, I was studying the scriptures. Nothing was more important to me in my life than understanding the Bible and having what I believed at the time was a fruitful relationship with Jesus and God.
Okay. And you said that, through the studying of it is how you came to realize the issues with it. And I'm just kind of wondering if you can sort of take us through, like, what was the first thing that got you started questioning, like, your beliefs and all that kind of stuff?
I think one of the bigger problems for me early on was the misuse and abuse of the Hebrew Bible by New Testament authors. Once I started learning Hebrew and I was able to pick up a Hebrew Bible and read it for myself, I began to see that the authors of the New Testaments kind of took a lot of liberties with the Hebrew text. I mean, a popular example would be in the Gospel of Matthew, uh, uh, the famous passage of therefore a virgin shall conceive and bear a son. And of course, when I went back to look at the Hebrew, quick to find out the Hebrew word for virgin, betulah, not used at all in the text. Hine ha'alma hara ve'yodedet ben ve'karat shemo Emmanuel. Behold, the young woman is with a child, and he will bear a son, and she will call his name Emmanuel. So not only was it had nothing to do with a virgin, but it was present tense. She is pregnant. As when Isaiah wrote it, she was already pregnant. And I saw example after example of this in the New Testament, where the authors were playing loose and quick and loose with their use of of the Old Testament text scriptures, especially Paul. But they either always take the verses out of their immediate context, or they're mistranslating it in order to sort of bring forward this idea that Jesus is fulfilling Scripture, something which Dr. Carrier understands. That's a pesher. It's a common way of interpreting the Bible in like apocalyptic cults back in the first century, but still unexcused. At least in my opinion, you're either reading the Bible plainly or you're misusing it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I pretty much agree with you on that particular point, because there's obviously a way that the authors in the Old Testament were writing and meant, like, that there is a context there that they're talking about. So yeah, I guess I'm just saying I totally agree with you on that point. But so that was kind of the beginning of it. What eventually led you to the point where you're just like totally rejecting like faith
Yeah.
altogether?
So in my my group where we used to have a Bible study in this congregation I used to belong to, it was a free form. We would read certain scriptures and then we would like interpret them or whatnot. We had a lot of people who were starting to buy into the flat Earth conspiracy theory, and they were using the Bible to justify their flat Earth conspiracy theories. And at the time, I know I was a fundamentalist, so I believed that the Earth was 6,000 years old, created in 6 days. Although I did not buy that the Earth was flat. I mean, I knew for a fact that the Earth is an oblate spheroid. Anyone who doesn't think so needs to go get checked out. But they were positing all these Bible verses, and I began to see that. I mean, for example, Isaiah 40:22, Ha Yoshev al Hu Ka'aretz, he sits upon the circle of the earth, and it doesn't say sphere. They had a word for sphere in Hebrew, dur, which is used elsewhere in Isaiah to describe how he throws the nation like a ball into the field. So they had a word for sphere, but the author chose to use circle. Then there's also these passages in Genesis about there being a dome above the sky, a rakia. And I remember one night I'm laying in bed and I'm thinking to myself, I remembered learning in high school that light had a speed. It could only go, that light could go very fast, but only so fast. And therefore it takes the light from stars to reach us. It takes light from the sun 8 minutes just to reach Earth. And I asked myself, what's the farthest star that we can see with the naked eye? And the answer is a star called B762 Cassiopeia, but it's like 16,000 light years away. It took the light 16,000 years just to reach Earth, and we can see it with the naked eye. That tells me that I must be off by at least 10,000 years. And so I began to question, I was like, okay, something's not quite right. For the longest time, though, I simply set it aside and said, okay, maybe the text should be read allegorically instead of literally. But of course, eventually, these problems sort of build up over time. There's not enough water in the world to flood the world up to the top of the mountains. It's obvious that dinosaurs were not with Noah on the ark. They did die 65 million years ago. Once I started looking more into scientific explanation of natural phenomenon like Big Bang cosmology, evolution, genetics, it became very clear that the authors of the Hebrew Bible they were just making guesses about the world based on a limited scope of understanding. And what really finally sort of hit the hammer on the nail for me was I opened myself up to non-Christian biblical scholarship, and I read this fantastic book by Francesca Stavrakopoulou called The Anatomy. I think it's called either God and Anatomy or The Anatomy of God, where basically Francesca points out that, listen, our conceptualization of God as this omnipotent, all-powerful, omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent being, that's not in the Bible. The way that the Israelites envisioned God was that he was like any other deity of the ancient world. And it just became very, very clear to me that that Yahweh was a myth, that there was no basis in reality in regards to the Hebrew Bible, and I became an atheist. And eventually, I was a historicist for a long time as an atheist. But then my friend Lexi, Lexi the Pharisee from TikTok, she inspired me to look again into Dr. Richard Carey's book on the historicity of Jesus. And Dr. Carey's arguments were they're pretty foolproof. I just had to bow and concede to the data that Dr. Carey had provided. And so not only is Yahweh a myth, but Jesus is also a myth.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you how you came to then be a mythicist, but it seems like, after taking a pretty hard look at the scientific evidence that refutes a literalist reading of the Bible, that was kind of what started you down the road of deconversion, right? And you have creationists now that have answers for all these things, like for the light issue. I believe there's Jason Lyle from the creation or the AIG Answers in Genesis, who claims that there's time zones in space that God created. And so basically the light, God basically created the light already in transit so that it could meet, so that we could see it. And so the light really isn't 16,000 or 16 million years old or whatever.
It's basically the idea that God created Adam as a full-grown adult. Therefore, he's creating the universe with age built in, an unfalsifiable claim.
Right. Exactly. And so they eventually have to, that's how they argue for things. They just ad hoc sort of pile things on there. Now, I have to say that I'm glad that you came out of fundamentalism. Do you see a big difference in yourself after you left the faith? I'm thinking comparing and contrasting you while you were still, deep in the faith versus you now. Are there big differences in your personality or anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, I think that the thing that would be the most obvious is that I'm no longer a bigot. Like I fully embrace members of the LGBT community. Um, so much so that I know I've dated people that were members of the community, which as 18-year-old me would have shuddered at the thought. But now I'm able to actually, Jesus said, "Love your neighbor as yourself." That's not something I was capable of doing until I set aside all that sort of fundamentalist mindset. So now I'm more open towards people, more understanding, more compassionate, and also I was able to sort of, without the constraints of fundamentalism, I was able to sort of cultivate my like critical thinking skills. So now I no longer see the world in a sort of black and white sort of way. I see that there is a lot of nuance to everything, including religion. Like I'm not like a strict anti-theist or anything. I don't like necessarily hate religion. I see, and I don't like, a lot of people on the internet will say things like, well, the Bible was written in order to to control the masses. It's a very black and white sort of like, I think it's more nuanced than that. Like people genuinely believed it. They were trying to figure out how the world worked, and there was a long, steady transition of like how these texts were written and composed, and nothing is ever as simple as black and white.
Well, so I guess just to push back a little bit, I wouldn't classify anti-theism as being like a hatred of religion. It's more like you think that religion is harmful to humanity in general and is therefore we're better off without it. So it's like an active push against religious ideas and just religion in general. How would you feel about that? Do you think that religion is kind of like a danger to humanity just in general?
So I think that I definitely agree that theistic evolution. I'm sorry, it's not theistic religion definitely has that problem. I think there's room, perhaps, in the future for humanity to develop other forms of religion that aren't dogmatic and fundamentalist. Like we have, for example, like the Satanic Temple, for example, which I think is kind of hokey and whatnot, but at least like they're providing community and sort of like, and I think it's pretty much the important thing about the Satanic Temple is like community is one of the big things. I think we could have structures in the future where it's structured in a very similar fashion to religion, but without the dogmatism. I think at the end of the day, it's fundamentalism and dogmatism that are really what are the most harmful towards society. And if you could hypothetically create a religion that lacks these very negative, toxic aspects, I think it would be fine. But of course, like how to do that, I wouldn't know. But I
Yeah.
definitely, usually on like TikTok, at least when we talk about the anti-theists, they're usually people who are it's usually there is a hostility. Not to say that all anti-theists are that way by any means, because again, nuance. But there's a lot of people on TikTok at least, and it's different. People on YouTube are a bit more professional with them, how they carry themselves. But generally, there's always
I,
exceptions to that.
I don't know. I've been around way too long, and so that's why I laugh, because there's some ridiculous people on YouTube.
Yeah, like Dr. Carrier, for example, in his book on the historicity of Jesus, he talks about how there's good mythicist scholarship, but then there's bad mythicist scholarship, and there's a lot of these people on TikTok who are holding on to a lot of bad scholarship, and they're also very aggressive in their presentation. It'd be one thing if they're like, yeah, we're going to do a critical analysis of religion, and we're going to critique it, and we're going to show where its faults are and why we shouldn't believe it. But generally, a lot of these people on TikTok are very aggressive and are also spouting off a bunch of, for lack of a better word, bullshit about religion. They're putting forth these ideas that aren't necessarily in line with the scholarship, and I think that hurts our cause more than it helps it.
Yeah, no, I agree, especially coming from a very mythicist sort of centered position. When I see, people pushing like Caesar's Messiah type stuff, like that really kind of gets under my skin, and I'm like, please don't do this. Please don't say that. Like, oh, the Romans invented Christianity. No,
Yeah, we
just
have a fellow on TikTok who pushes that idea, and even as a mythicist, I'm over here like, dude, I think you're pulling this out of your ass. I don't know where you're getting all this information from, but like the most important thing for us as like people who are talking about these subjects like mythicism is that we are making sure that we are going by the scholarship, that we are presenting facts and data, and that we're not letting well, we need to avoid the conspiracy theory mindset at all things. I think like an example of this is there's a lot of people on the internet who are like, oh yeah, Horus had 12 disciples and he was baptized and there were 3 wise men and all these other things. Like, no, that's not true. That never happened. There are plenty of actual ways in which like the myth, how the mystery cult of early Christianity sort of like was like copying or mirroring these other aspects, but it doesn't do us any good to just make stuff up without citing good scholarship.
Yeah. And I can't tell you the number of times I've had to comment on somebody sharing that it's like a 2x3 grid of like supposed people that are exactly like Jesus. And it comes from the documentary Religulous. Yeah.
Yes, I saw that a long time ago, and I was like, I remember thinking, oh my gosh, this is a crazy. I can't believe all these different religions. No, that's bullshit. Like, yeah, I think that's one of the great things about Dr. Carey's book is that he really showed that look, and you can hold to this view, and it can be critical and it can be data driven without like we all need to be skeptics not only about religion, but we need to be skeptics in regards to like internet atheist claims as well.
Yeah, totally. So what was thinking about how how you left religion and you were an atheist and you were a staunch historicist, which I mean I wouldn't call myself a staunch historicist. I was just it kind of resembled my time as a Christian. I just sort of automatically assumed things. And I'm wondering for you, like, what was one thing that you really held on to, like, as somebody supporting the historical Jesus idea? What was kind of like the one big thing that sort of changed after became a mythicist, I guess?
That's a good question. So I wouldn't say I was a staunch historicist either. Like it was just like the assumption. It's just assumed and taken for granted that Jesus existed. And a lot of scholars like Francesca Stavrakopoulos, Dan McClellan, Bart Ehrman famously, and like they all just to sort of like say that there's a historical Jesus. And and I think one of the things that I just needed to realize that I needed to be more open to scholarship, despite even if it's not. Because here's the thing, and people like to point this out all the time, is that they'll say, "Listen, the consensus says this, and you're going against the grain." Well, there was a time in history when the idea that Moses existed was the scholarly consensus. Every biblical scholar just accepted that Moses existed. And how did that change? Well, some scholars came up with with sort of a critical analysis of the text and at the data, and came to the conclusion that we don't have a good reason to think Moses existed, and he's probably a myth. And what changed was people like you and me, and also professional scholars in the field, assessing the data, changing their mind, and not being like ashamed to like say, yeah, this isn't the consensus, but it should be, and here's the reasons why. So I'm more open to more ideas now as a result. Before, I would have like shunned automatically certain ideas from the get-go, but now I'm willing to give more people the time of day to see if the data backs up their belief.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. Just like I can understand why people are, I guess, maybe attracted by the like Caesar's Messiah type idea, but the problem that generally arises, at least for me, is that a lot of times there's just way too much speculation and it's light on fact, and so that for me is why I reject a lot of the kookier mythicist claims, but also why I reject a lot of the mainstream scholarship on a lot of these topics. I was in a conversation the other day where I mentioned how Acts is historical fiction, and it like apparently threw a big wrench in this guy's thinking because he just stopped dead. He just stopped. It was like, oh, okay. I don't know how to process that, but anyways, and he just like kept continuing. And then other people in the chat were like, godless is embarrassing and all this other stuff. And I was just sitting there trying to explain how, like, well, Paul only had scriptures and visions to inform himself. Like, he didn't have anybody that actually knew Jesus that walked. Like, I wasn't even trying to make an argument that Jesus didn't exist. I was just trying to say, like, all the information we have is not based on like firsthand eyewitnesses. And for me, I guess, to bring this around, for me, that was the biggest thing to like realize about, just the evidence that we have is that there's no firsthand accounts about Jesus or any kind of firsthand information or any kind of information that we can actually know. So it's like, what is all of this based on? And that's kind of what threw me down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, especially in regards to Acts. I mean, like, not only so a lot of scholars are now starting to think that Acts, at least that the author of Acts, whoever he is, just for the sake of simplicity, I'll just call him Luke. It wasn't Luke, but we can just call him Luke. Luke is using Josephus's Antiquities of the Jews as a source. A lot of scholars are coming to this conclusion. But the problem is Antiquities wasn't written until 90 to 95 CE, meaning that Acts would have to be written after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
Moreover, it's definitely not. We are also seeing that the way in which that Paul's story is portrayed in Acts, it's not even faithful to Paul's own testimony about how he became a believer. Like, nothing about him going to Arabia, nothing about him having no contact with any human sources or learning anything about Jesus from a human person. The exact opposite is true in the Acts, where he's like right from the start, he's talking to Ananias. And he's talking to all kinds of believers in Damascus, and then goes straight to Jerusalem, even though he didn't go to Jerusalem for 15 years, accordingly to him. So it's very obvious that the author of Acts is kind of making up his own history. Or I think, for me, I grew up in a church that spoke in tongues, engaged in glossolalia. And I think, and Dr. Carey would probably agree that whatever, like, what the mystery cult of Christianity in the first century, what they were engaging in was glossolalia. They were just doing incoherent babbling. But by the time we get to the book of Acts, that incoherent babbling has been mythologized to become this supernatural event where the apostles are just speaking, and people are hearing them in their own languages. Paul doesn't say anything about any of that. We're seeing like a historical phenomenon of glossolalia that is being mythologized in the book of Acts. So I don't think we have any good reason to suspect that Acts is a historical account of anything.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so to shift off of that topic real quick, because I do have one more thing that I was going to ask you, and then maybe I can geek out about mythicist stuff. If you if you could sort of talk to your past self, and I'm trying to think of people that are kind of in your previous position while you were religious and everything like that, what's some advice that you could give for yourself, like as far as the future that that you're going to go through, as far as like finding out all the things that you did, losing your faith and everything like that? What kind of advice would you give yourself?
Well, it's a good question, because not very recently I did have a guest on my TikTok that very much reminded me of my younger self, and it made me ask myself, how would I interact with my younger self? What advice would I give to my younger self? Because I would probably tell little Bible guy, I would tell him, first and foremost, you need to start thinking a little bit more critically about what you believe. I would probably teach him about how to form syllogisms, how to think through your ideas, logical fallacies. But more importantly, I would probably try to make it clear to him that the world is a beautiful place, and you don't need magic to make it more real. Just because you learn how the rainbow works doesn't make it any less beautiful. And to not be scared of what is actually out there in the world.
I think that's great advice. And now, like, what would you give yourself? What kind of advice would you give yourself just after you came out of religion? I'm not exactly sure how long ago that was, but like,
yeah, I would say, first off, don't be so angry. Don't be so angry. We all get that like immediately after leaving religion. There's that angry phase. We're just angry at everybody, and we're going off the rails. And no one lied to you. First and foremost, no one lied to you. They were mistaken, and they just related what they had been mistakenly taught to. They are the people who are still perpetrating these ideas, for the most part, the regular Christians and the regular pastors. They have just been they they have just been mistaken as well. They are victims of the system just as much as you were. And be kind to them and realize that you were them at one point. And also, you don't know everything. You still, if anything, the more you learn, the more you're gonna realize you don't know jack shit about anything. So stay humble.
I think that's great advice. So back to, I guess, maybe more of the Bible mythicist sort of topic here. What is like the worst argument you've heard for God, just in general? Like out of all of your discussions on TikTok, which are anybody in the chat there that hasn't seen any of the TikTok lives, either by the Bible guy or anybody else that Bible guy runs around with, it's definitely an interesting time if you really like the Line or the call-in show, any of the call-in shows. It's really interesting, at least for me. I like having it on and just listening to all the conversations happening. But through all of your conversations, what's been the worst argument that you've heard?
There's one that there are a couple, but one of the ones that keeps coming up, and I don't understand why people keep bringing it up, is they say, I'll get a caller and they'll come up and they'll say, what has it been 2024 years since? In other words, they appeal to the fact that we use the Gregorian calendar as evidence that Jesus was the Messiah. Like the fact that we're counting. And I was like, well, first and foremost, even if Jesus exists as a person, according to Matthew, at least, he was born before the death of King Herod the Great. Was Jesus born 4 years before Christ? Like, it's problematic. I think that's probably the worst one, is that I don't understand how. I mean, it's very obvious that the reason we use the Gregorian calendar is because Christianity became a popular religion in the Western world, and we situate our calendar in accordance to our beliefs. That's why we use the Gregorian calendar. But there are plenty of countries that don't use the Gregorian calendar. Israel, Taiwan, these other nations, they are not using, it's not the year 2024 in their calendars. It's a very American-centric, very Western mind-centric sort of thought process. That's probably one of the worst ones. Also, people do ask you about the Big Bang Theory. There's a lot of misinformation. The education system has really failed us in America. A lot of people seem to think, listen, the Big Bang says that that there was nothing and it became something. Obviously, that's a God. Well, no, the Big Bang doesn't actually posit positively that there was nothing that came to something. It's just expansion. And yeah, the internet is. I used to hold people in a higher regard. I was like, no, like we're very smart as a society. I no longer think that's true. There are a lot of people out there with a lot of bad arguments, and or probably one of the most annoying ones is probably a citation of any discovery by Ron White. Is probably the most annoying. I can't tell you how many goddamn times I've had to hear about chariots at the bottom of the Red Sea. No, we did not find chariots. We did not find Sodom and Gomorrah. And no, that mountain ridge in Ararat is not the ark.
Yeah, I remember looking into that because I'll run across these arguments, and they're arguments I've never heard before, like chariots at the bottom of the Red Sea, or the supposed boats on Mount Ararat and everything like that. Like, I always have to go in and I'm like, well, shit, I don't know exactly what they're talking about. So it's like, I got to find like the picture that because they just always like, there's pictures of it. Oh, let me see if I can find it and everything like that. And so I've got to go and try to find it. And then I got to figure out, like why this isn't that, because I've immersed myself in biblical scholarship and enough to the point where it's kind of like, I know that the Exodus, at least as it's laid out in the Bible, definitely didn't happen. And we've got a Bible podcast here on the channel where Casey and I, my wife, we've actually gone through it, which is not a very academic from my part. I generally try to reframe the lesson that we go through in a very ridiculous way so that it's not anything that's actually in the Bible. And then we go and we actually read, through the Bible. But, as far as like the Exodus goes, know that it didn't happen that way, but it's kind of like when they come up with these very specific, uh, 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 arguments for why it definitely did happen, it's like I've got to go and do all this research. Do you find yourself in a similar position? Like, do you find yourself hearing new information and then it's like, well, shit, there goes 3 hours of my life I've got to do a bunch of research about?
Well, in regards to Christianity or Judaism, not so much anymore, because let me say something. I'm a nerd and I have no social life. My whole life is spent studying this shit or spending time with my co-host. And besides that, not doing much of anything else. But in regards to Islam, yes, I get new information thrown at me all the time, claims from Islam, and that's where I have to sink a lot of my time into now. Is that in full stop, I don't know much of anything about Islam. It's never been important to me. It never even seemed relevant to me. So I'm just now barely scratching the surface of like having to study about Islam. But even now, it's not that important to me. But yeah, people make claims all the time. I had to go and to look into like whether or not we actually have any like verifiable data that these are chariots at the bottom of the Red Sea. And I've done a lot of research on that. I've yet to find anyone that actually says, yeah, we've gone and we've looked and we've actually excavated it and there actually are chariots. No, all we have are these pictures from Ron Wire and nothing more. But luckily, a lot of these, because even as a Christian, I was always skeptical about these claims. Like when someone posited the chariots at the bottom of the Red Sea, I was already skeptical about this because I knew that supposedly the Exodus event took place at the end of the 15th century BCE. If these were the Pharaoh's chariots, they would have been disintegrated by now. They would have been buried in sand. There's no fucking way that this is real. Of course, I wouldn't have used that kind of language, I guess, to talk about it. But I've always been, even if when I was gullible enough to believe in religion, I've always had a streak of critical thought, I guess. So even when I was in high school, people used to talk about the Illuminati or whatever, and I automatically knew it was bullshit. Anytime someone posited a different conspiracy theory to me, I was never gullible enough to really buy into it. So I'm lucky that I wasn't one of those Christians that just read something online and just automatically believed it without any further information.
Well, I mean, that's good to hear. And sorry if I seemed distracted there for a second. I was actually I didn't have your TikTok link in the description, but I do have that now. If anybody is watching and wants to go and subscribe or follow, I guess is what it is over there on TikTok. You can go and follow the Bible guy, which you go live like pretty much every day, don't you? It kind of seems like nearly every day.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, this might be surprising, but I was not going live at all until 3 weeks ago. I mean, I would go on as a guest on Lexi's live, but my co-host Ashlyn, she's the one. She's the Holy Spirit to my Apostle Paul. She's like inspires me to get out there and do the work, to fight the good fight. And because if it wasn't for her, I probably wouldn't be doing this. I probably would have just gotten bored immediately or annoyed and just sort of given up on it. But yeah, we go live pretty much every day. And now on Sundays, we're doing Bible studies now on Sundays. Today we read Genesis 1-3. Next week we'll read some more chapters. So every Sunday, while the Christians are at church, we're going to be actually seeing what the Bible actually says.
Good. Yeah, and I heard that you're going to be skipping the Psalms because that's just a whole bunch of like prayer and worship stuff. We actually skip those parts too. We read from it's called the Daily Bible, which is like it breaks the Bible up into 365 lessons that it goes through. And of course, the Daily Bible actually uses the NIV, so it not exactly the best translation, but we've been going through it there. But I know that you suggest using the NRSV UE, right?
Yeah, the New Revised Standard Version, updated edition. You can thank Dr. Dan McClellan for that suggestion. But as far as Bible translations go, it's a little bit more honest than your average Christian translation. So much so that, like, for example, if you were to open up Isaiah 7:14, they admittedly text in the text, "Behold, the young woman is with child." Like, they're at least a little bit more honest with the text. It's more scholarly. A lot of scholars do suggest this translation for its authenticity to the original Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek of the Bible. But yeah, and it's or for a Jewish Bible, the New Jewish Publication Society is a good translation. But yeah, we're going to be skipping Psalms because I'm going to be mostly using anything that's narrative parts or epistles. So wisdom literature like the Psalms, Proverbs, Song of Solomon. Unless we're feeling really spicy, maybe we'll get into the Song of Solomon. But yeah, for the most part, we're going to be ignoring all the wisdom literature and just going straight for the narrative, the stories of the Bible.
Okay. Yeah, I know I usually get on my wife's nerves whenever we do our Bible readings and recordings and everything like that, because the innuendo is strong in the Bible, and I'm always there to accentuate the innuendo that I'm 12. Yes, honey, that I'm 12. I'm
Oh yeah,
I'm
the Bible
I'm
has
not.
lots of fun innuendos. I think my favorite that recently has been pointed out to me is that feet is often a euphemism for genitalia in the Bible. And Francesca Stavrakopoulos points that out in her book God in Anatomy. And there's a story in Ruth where Ruth goes into Boaz's chambers and she uncovers his feet, and it's very much obviously a euphemism for some other act.
Yeah, I could see that. The one that gets me that's not is probably not like a euphemism for anything is I think it's in the Psalm, maybe it's in Psalms, but it's basically this the person in the Psalms shoves his hand through a door, and like the person on the other side's like, my bowels move for him. And like I'm just sitting there, my first reaction was, did she shit in his hand? Like, this is kind of a weird kiki thing. Like my brain, my how my brain processes words, at least on the initial, is always in the mind of a 12-year-old.
No, we don't kink shame here. All right.
All right, so now let me ask you this: what argument for the historical Jesus are you most tired of? Like, I know that I posed a question to you the other day on one of your TikTok lives, but like, what's the worst argument that you can think of? And that you couldn't really think of one, but I'm wondering, which one are you the most tired about?
Let me think, because I don't do the topic very often, and I'm going to be doing it more often in the future. People will just assert that we have all these Roman sources for Jesus, or they'll say we have more information on Jesus than any person in ancient history, which is nonsense. Like, we have more actual biographical information for Socrates or Julius Caesar than we have for Jesus. All we have for Jesus are these allegorical myths and hallucinations from Paul, and the same. We don't even know who wrote the Gospels. We know who's writing the letters about Socrates. Like, we know that his disciples named themselves, and there are other people who were not friends of Socrates who wrote about him. So just people asserting that we know more about Jesus than any other person in ancient history, probably the most annoying, because it's just so blatantly untrue.
Yeah, for me, it's either that, or it's when they say that, basically, why would you question the historicity of Jesus? Everybody thinks that he existed. That one too is one that I get a lot, and it's like, well, I understand that. I'm questioning their evidence. It's kind of like people don't seem to be able to really grasp that difference in like, going with consensus and then questioning like why the consensus exists.
Yes,
um
yes, because there's always consensus in the scholarship, but consensus changes, and people don't take into consideration how that change occurs. And it occurs because of people like you and like me and like the professionals in the field, Dr. Carrier. Without, I mean, how else like would we move in the? How else would we gain new ideas and learn anything new if we just accepted this fact? something that someone said before us. We need to evaluate the data and not hold on to the dogma.
Right. Yeah, and I find that it's quite curious the whole dogma aspect of it, because I was in a conversation on Twitter one time with Dan McClellan, and it was over the I can't remember which verse it is, but it's a verse that is better explained as Jesus being actually made from the seed of David. I think it was actually Romans 3:1, and not 3:1. Sorry, 1:3.
It's probably Romans 1:3. He was made according to he was made from the seed of David according to the flesh.
Right. And I'm talking to Dan McClellan, and I'm trying to get him to explain to me why it can't mean this other thing. And the best that he could come up with was, well, there's just no reason to interpret it the other way. And that has always been, that particular line of logic has always just not been all that convincing to me. Like, oh, you shouldn't interpret it this way because there's no reason to change the already established interpretation. What do you think about that when, you're going back and you're re-looking at the, like, especially the epistles of Paul, and trying to figure out what Paul believed about Jesus?
Yeah, so that's always, because it's pretty hard for us to cleanse our minds of preconceived ideas. And reading Paul has always been a favorite. Paul has always been a favorite of mine, because he's got so much content, and also Paul is probably the most problematic of New Testament of any biblical author. And also, what's most interesting about him is that we actually know who's writing his books, and it's him, at least for the 7 authentic epistles. But ever since I started reading Dr. Carey's book and studying it, it becomes very clear that Paul has not actually been presenting a historical Jesus, not flesh and blood, but not a Jesus who exists on earth. And that there have been certain passages that even before I got to that argument in Dr. Carey's book, like there's a passage where he talks about on the night before he was betrayed, and which people think would be a reference to Judas, but that word betrayed just simply means in the Greek to hand over. And that same exact wording is used elsewhere in Paul's writings, how God handed over Jesus to be crucified. So, like, at least for me, it doesn't seem all that difficult to understand Paul in light of mythicism, but no one is going to be perfect. No scholar out there is going to be perfect in their ability to detach themselves from some sort of preconceived notions. Even now, me and my co-host Ashlyn, we were just studying Genesis 3 last night about. I had always been under the assumption that Eve had no pain in childbirth prior to the curse, and that it was just something added to her as a result of the curse. But and I was very staunch about that. But she points out very clearly that the text just says that her pain would be multiplied, not that it doesn't say anything about, like, that preconceived notion that it wasn't there at all isn't in the text. So I'm always having to see myself as, like, double checking my preconceptions and biases when it comes to the text, because we don't live in a vacuum, and we do have to sort of correct ourselves sometimes, and that includes professionals in the field.
No, yeah, and I definitely wasn't trying to throw shade at Dan McClellan, because Dan,
yeah, I still love Dan, even though he's a historicist. Love him to death. I watch his content all the time.
Yeah, Dan's really good at it, and Bart Ehrman, outside of this particular topic area, I generally refer to for a lot of things. So like, it's really just in this one topic area that seems to really get people to hold on to these very antiquated ideas of interpreting the material. Why do you think that is? Like, I know a lot of people might throw it the mythicist direction, like, oh, you're just a conspiracy theorist because you think everybody's trying to hide it or something like that. But I mean, kind of curious, why do you think that a lot of these scholars don't, challenge the consensus about this?
I think it's scary. It's a scary idea, especially if this is your career, that to posit something which, as of right now, seems very radical, I would argue it's not all that radical. That nothing Dr. Carey says actually is against any of the scholarship. I think bits and pieces of everything he says is found in the scholarship. But if you have built a career off of a historical Jesus, for example, then it can be kind of it could be seen as like a huge risk to start putting out their ideas that everyone else thinks is crazy, and it could like sort of like make it very difficult for you to be taken seriously, which is sad. Which is ultimately why more people, if you're out there and you are a mythicist and you are knowledgeable on the topic, speak out. Like let's not let this be like let's not be the silent minority. Let's speak out and make it known what the position is, so that it's more acceptable to. It's very similar to how there was a time when in society it was frowned upon for being a member of the LGBT community, and you didn't want to come out because of the backlash you receive. But when people started speaking out proudly about who they are, it became more acceptable to be a member of that community. And we need to do the same thing as mythicists, that we cannot be subject to the fear of like being outside of the norm.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you on that. And I think that a lot of people are sort of a bit hesitant about going that direction, because then you invite like having to provide answers for like every single aspect of Christianity. I mean, I literally this may crack you up. I don't know. It cracked me up when it happened, but I've literally had somebody complain to me that my position, the mythicist position, has an answer for every problem that they have, and apparently that is a bad thing. Like it's a bad thing for you to have an answer for everything. So it's like you just can't win.
See, because on the one hand, I get it, because Christians have an answer for everything, and their answers are usually shit. But if the answers that we're providing are based in the data, then the fact that we have a lot of answers to these questions is a point in our box. Like that shouldn't be a problem. I don't understand why anyone would complain about us having answers to questions. That's what they're asking for. They're saying, if Jesus didn't exist, then why this? And when you provide an answer, why do you have? Then they get angry about you having an answer for these questions. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. And that was in response to somebody having problems with like my interpretations of Galatians 4:4 and explaining, that and everything. It's like, oh, you've got an answer for everything. And then they proceeded to compare me to creationists and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, yeah, it's exactly what
I think they're projecting a little bit.
It kind of seemed like it to me, just a tad. Anyways, so moving away from, I guess, mythicism a little bit, I did want to ask you, what would be your go-to like scripture or something like that if you wanted to showcase like, I guess maybe how the biblical God is not like is not the true God or doesn't exist, or however you want to formulate that. Like, is there a certain scripture that you'd use?
I would point, not necessarily with regards to how there is no God, but how our conceptualization of the deity is not accurate to the biblical text. For example, like we have ideas about God, that we have ideas of monotheism, of God being incorporeal, omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent, all the omnis, that he's the super powerful God. And there are a few verses I usually point to in regards to the fact that there is more than one God in the Hebrew Bible. I would either point to most likely Psalm 82, where Yahweh sits in the divine council, he judges among the gods. Or Exodus 15 in the Song of Moses, they say, who is like you, O Yahweh, among the gods? In regards to God's temporal nature, about how he is limited in his power and his ability, I can see, for example, in the Genesis story, which we just read today in the Bible study, that God is walking around in the garden, and he's having to say things like, where are you? I don't know where you're at, Adam and Eve. You're hiding, and I don't know where you're at. He obviously, he's not omnipresent or omniscient, or else he would simply be there behind the bush with Adam and Eve, and he would know that they're there. Or, of course, a really good example of this is in Genesis 18. Abraham and Yahweh are walking along towards the city of Sodom, and Yahweh says to the angels, like he's asking them for advice. He goes like, should I tell Abraham what I plan to do since I've chosen him for this special purpose? And then he tells Abraham, look, the outcry of Sodom has come up to me. I'm going to go see if it's as bad as I've heard. And if it is, then I'll know. Then you'll know. What do you mean? Don't you already know? Or God being this being that isn't subject to change. I think the Hebrew Bible is very clear on this, that Yahweh is going to annihilate the Jewish people because of the golden calf. And Moses pleads on his behalf. And then it says, and Yahweh changed his mind of the evil he was going to do to his people Israel. So I think the biggest thing that a lot of theists have a hard time with is that they have a conceptualization of the deity, and that needs to be reevaluated. It needs to be made obvious to them that the way in which God is presented in the Hebrew Bible is not different than the way he's presented in any other ancient myth.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's a pretty good point. Like I guess I was expecting like, oh yeah, Numbers 31 or something like that, but that was an awesome answer.
I mean, those are problematic, but I don't think those verses necessarily prove that God doesn't exist. At best, they prove that he's a dick, and that we shouldn't be worshiping him. In regards to why God doesn't exist, I just point to the fact that he's very obviously constructed. Yahweh, at least, is very obviously constructed from the social sort of background of ancient Bronze Age Israelites. And if there is a God out there, it's not Yahweh. And then we can go on to, do we philosophically have any good reason to think that there's a creator deity out there? And I don't think there is.
Yeah. Well, I guess very specifically to the Christian version of God, being that omnibenevolence is one of the key factors, I typically try to highlight how, well, if he is omnibenevolent, then he wouldn't have allowed this. Therefore, that particular interpretation, I guess I should say, is not the true representation or is accurate to reality if he is omnibenevolent. So it's very specific.
Away at the picture of God until we get to the biblical form of God, and once you have that exposed, it becomes unbelievable.
Yeah, no, I totally agree about that. Now, so we are coming up on an hour. I was really only kind of, we're a little bit past an hour. I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I am kind of wondering, like, you got started, doing, hopping into the lives and everything like that on TikTok and everything. What kind of motivated you to like do that? Like, what motivated you to hop into the first live that you did, like over there on TikTok, and like, become the Bible guy, I guess?
Well, ultimately, it's my best friend in the whole world, Ashland. She was very bored and she really wanted to do lives, and I will do anything to make her happy. So I go and do the lives, and it's just become something we do every day together. And it's 100% because that she has pushed me and motivated me that the Bible guy as he exists today. So if anyone likes my content, then you should follow her and thank her.
Yeah, definitely. And just to remind everybody, I do have the Bible Guys TikTok down in the description if you would like to go and follow him over there, which I know over on TikTok, it'll let you know, like, if he's joined somebody else's live, and anybody that he's in a live with, as far as like, as I've seen, they're all worth a follow. So definitely do that. I'm trying to think of other things to talk about with the whole TikTok aspect, because like I said, I like jumping into the lives on occasion. And since I've been jumping into the lives, like it always surprises me whenever when I get up there and they're like, "Are you the Godless Engineer?" Because it's like, I think the first time that I popped into your live, or maybe it was Lexi's live or something like that, but I popped in there and it's like, oh, the Godless Engineer is here. I'm like, I'm not that important, guys. But
I know I had to ask, because with TikTok, there are so many people out there who are like pretending to be other people. I've been personally messaged by the Dan McClellan, but it turns out it wasn't actually Dan. Like it's someone pretending to be Dan. So you just got to be careful that someone's not posing as you or anyone else out there.
Yeah, and so where I was going with that is, have you encountered that at all? Since the Bible guy and everything, like, have you popped into somebody's live and they're like, "Are you the actual one?"
Uh, am I the one? So not quite that yet because I don't spend very much time in strangers' lives. If I'm not in my live, I'm going to be in Lexi the Pharisee's live, or my friend Jay's live. Outside of that, I don't spend a lot of time in strangers' lives because tend to be a bit of a dominating presence. I can't help it. I talk too much is the problem, and but I have had other people talking about me in other lives. Apparently, Darth Dawkins, for example, apparently has wet dreams about me at night, supposedly, and. Yeah, yeah. But who hasn't he been thinking about? So, but we are just getting started. And I do plan on eventually, making a YouTube channel and putting out information on the Bible there from a purely scholarly perspective, academic stance. And eventually, I would like to do a project, either a mythicist commentary of certain biblical books of the New Testament,
Mhm.
or a documentary on the topic of mythicism. I think would be really fun to make.
Oh, that's cool. Well, yeah, whenever you get started over here on YouTube, you just let me know and I'll do my best to, sort of get you started and everything like that. And I'm here for any kind of like advice, that, like, if you're wondering like what kind of webcam should I get, or how to do something or another here on YouTube. I mean, I'm not trying to sit here and pat my own back about being on YouTube or anything, but I'm just saying that, like, you need help, I'm here for you to help you out
Absolutely,
there.
yeah. I will definitely get with you on that because I don't. My setup is a tripod and my phone, and I
Yeah.
don't have anything outside of that. So I definitely would like to get with you on what kind of equipment would be best because I don't half-ass things. If I'm going to do a YouTube channel, I want to do it right. I want to make sure that the information is palatable and easily accessible to everyone.
Well, I gotta tell you, whenever you do get your YouTube channel up and going, I know that, like, the lives, I believe they save in your. I've only done like one live before. They save in your account, and putting certain conversations that are pretty contentious are a really good way of getting some exposure, at least here on YouTube. Because I've noticed on my channel, like, whenever I post clips from like call-in shows and stuff like that where I'm directly interacting with people, those always do just phenomenal. And so I think that, if you wanted to just keep a channel just for the informational stuff, that would be fine too. But I think repurposing either your TikTok lives, or cutting out certain sections from your lives and putting them on a channel. I think that would be a great way of getting some exposure out there or whatever. But that's just that's what I would do. I guess that's the
Oh, I
reason why I'm
agree. I've
saying it.
thought about that as well. Yeah, I agree.
Okay. But anyways, I'm gonna wrap things up here. Is there anything that I didn't touch on today that you kind of wanted to talk about or anything like that?
You know what? No, if I ever think about anything, I'll let you know. But I think you pretty much covered my origin story, and I'm just waiting for my supervillain, whoever that might be, my ultimate nemesis. So we'll see who
Darth
that is.
Darth Dawkins
Darth
is the
Dawkins.
nemesis of everybody. And also,
Yeah,
when you
yeah.
mentioned
I want someone who's exclusive to me. I don't. I'm not no one side piece. I'm the main dish. So yeah.
yeah, when you said Darth Dawkins, my wife is sitting over there listening, and she's like, "Fuck that guy."
Exactly. Yeah. I don't entertain presuppositionalist apologists. If I get a hint that someone is, I ask them. I say, if you do lie to me, your God will know. And they say, yes, I'm a presuppositionalist, and I just immediately drop them because I ain't got time for that bullshit. No one got time for that bullshit.
Yeah, I agree. I hate presuppositionalists. I think the only time I was actually at, I don't know if you know the debate. It's Matt Dillahunty versus Saitin Bruggencate. That
Oh
was
God.
held in Memphis. Memphis. Um, I was actually there, and I actually got to ask a question. And I mean, like, that's pretty much the only time I've watched or been interested in like any kind of presuppositional arguments. Although I have handled them before, and I still continue to handle them. That was like the first time like I kind of encountered this whole presuppositional idea. So
Yeah,
that was
that
kind of
debate.
interesting.
Yeah, that debate was that's where I first began to know that I hate presuppositionalists. Is that debate made me, I was like, oh, I fucking hate this. This is unbearable. There's no way I can ever debate someone like this, because what's the point? What's the point, really?
Yeah. Exactly. All right. Well, thank you so much there, Bible guy, for coming on here and, I guess basically getting introduced to my audience, however much smaller, because it is a very much smaller audience than you're probably used to over there on TikTok. But I'm so glad that you came on here to give us your origin story and all that kind of stuff. And I can't wait to jump into your next live sometime. I have a lot of fun whenever I jump in there, and I know I don't do it often, but y'all have a really great atmosphere over there, and so I hope more people join you. Which you don't seem to be, hurting for viewership over there. So
Yeah, we love having you over there. Lexi's a huge fan of you, and you're fun to have around. So yeah, you're more than welcome to join the panel anytime you love.
Awesome. All right. Well, everybody, I've got the Bible Guys link down in the description. Definitely go down there, check him out. I will share, like, whenever Bible Guy gets his own Bible Guy channel here on YouTube, I'll be sure to let y'all know. And I don't know, are you planning on going live later on? Like, I don't know if you were planning on going
Yeah,
live
we're gonna
again.
go live on Lexi's live later. We're gonna just kind of hang out after the show. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Well, everybody go over there, find Bible Guy and Lexi's TikTok and everything like that. And y'all just have fun and everything. Make sure you tell them that I sent you if you're watching this and you go over there to TikTok and you pop into their chat. And I guess I will let you go there, Bible Guy, and I'll see all you heathens later. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.